Okay, thank you all so much for tuning in today. I'm really excited to dive into this incredible office hours with our expert Melody. So, a bit of background on her. She is a former therapist turned executive and leadership coach for sensitive strivers. I absolutely love that term. Named one of Business Insider's most innovative coaches for 10 years, she has coached top performers who think and feel everything more deeply. Melody is also a licensed social worker and coach. She helps sensitive high achievers break free from self-doubt and overwhelm so they can thrive. Melody is also the author of the recently published book, Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work, which offers concrete steps to help you break free from stress, perfectionism, and self-doubt so you can find the confidence to work and lead effectively. It debuted as a #1 new release on Amazon and was selected as an Apple Best Book of the Month. So congratulations, Melody, on all those incredible accomplishments. As far as questions for today's session, feel free to drop them in the chat as they come up, and then we'll be having a designated Q&A session at the end where Melody will answer all of your questions. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Melody. We are so excited to learn from your expertise today. We know how valuable your time is, and we're so grateful for you taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for that amazing introduction. And let me just know if in the chat you can see my screen okay before I get rolling. But it is a pleasure to be here with all of you today to talk about how to advocate for yourself more effectively with strength, not shame, so that you can be more visible in your work and be more effective and successful too. All right, great. Looks like we are ready to roll then. So I want to start out by telling you the story of one of my clients who I will call Angie. She was a management consultant, and she was someone who excelled at communicating with clients. She was very comfortable with that. But Angie felt like she would get in her own way when it came to communicating internally within her firm. And in particular, she struggled to get her voice heard among more gregarious, outgoing colleagues. And although she had years of experience under her belt, Angie feared her ideas were silly and she held back from sharing them. And then there's Grace, a founder of a tech startup. And while she was someone who was able to look calm and collected on the outside, Grace secretly struggled with anxiety during meetings. She was extensively knowledgeable, but she would get so wrapped up in her own head, worrying about what people might think of her, that she found herself rambling during calls. So I want to know, you can go ahead and type in the chat if you identify with either Angie or Grace, if either of these situations sound like something you have faced yourself, or maybe your colleagues or fellow dreamers and doers have told you about. Hannah says yes. Yeah. Robin says yes. So these stories of Angie and Grace, why I wanted to share them with you is because they exemplify the struggles that so many professional women face every day. Many of you said yes to that question of if you relate to this, and you are far from alone. More flexible and remote work arrangements, like what we find ourselves in right now, can be an equalizer for women, but they are not without their challenges. For example, a study from the University of Melbourne shows that in households with children, parents are putting in an extra 6 hours a day of care and supervision, with the majority of that falling to women to pick up the extra time. That means women face more stress, more demands than ever before, which taxes our ability to show up and focus with our full effort. And in the remote environment, women also find it harder to get access to decision makers and visibility. And according to HBR, that can lead them to miss out on critical assignments and advancement. And the online environment, probably most interesting of all, is shown to amplify pre-existing imbalances. Researchers at Georgetown found that in virtual meetings, women tend to talk less, be interrupted more, and we tend to use more self-deprecating language. So downplaying and diminishing ourselves is pervasive among women of all levels, so much so that close to 70%, 69% of women would rather minimize their successes rather than tell people about them. And this is even a bigger issue for women who are over age 50, who are more averse to self promotion and likely to downplay their strengths and their abilities. So, all of this data goes to underscore the importance of powerful communication. Because in order to succeed in today's business world, you must get your voice heard. It's no longer a nice to have, it's an imperative for advancing your career, your business, and bolstering your own self esteem and your confidence while you're at it. So, as Hannah mentioned, I'm Melody Wilding. I am the author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. And my zone of genius is helping smart, sensitive professionals get out of their own way so that they can stop doubting themselves and unlock their full potential. My clients are individual contributors, managers, leaders at some of the world's top companies, along with entrepreneurs and small business owners. But no matter what their rank, their title, their industry, they all have one very important thing in common. And that is that they struggle to be more assertive, which is why I wanted to share this training with you today. So, we are going to cover some of the things that may be holding you back. So, you are going to learn some tangible techniques for strengthening your communication so that you can show up as your best self across different contexts. We're also going to discuss how to share your accomplishments in a organic way and set boundaries without guilt. We're going to talk about how to stop diminishing yourself so you can project more authority and confidence to be taken more seriously. So I want to hear from you. Again, you can use the chat. When you think about the idea of speaking up, using your voice, what comes to mind? And in particular, what holds you back from using your voice in the way you want to? So Robin said, it's right there in the picture, which you got me, that it's the not enough story. Hannah said, needing to be the nice girl, don't want to ruffle feathers. Perfect. So, yes, oftentimes this is exactly what I hear. We struggle to speak up often because of the negative associations we have with being assertive. So there's so many different reasons why women find it hard to express ourselves. So for many of us, we were conditioned, we grew up believing that it wasn't okay to share our opinions. Instead, we're taught that we need to be likable, we need to be agreeable in order to be successful. But that mindset doesn't serve us, especially in today's ultra competitive world where if you don't advocate for yourself, no one will. So we have to question some of that early conditioning and programming. And then there's imposter syndrome. That is the voice of not being good enough, right? The voice of your inner critic that questions whether you have anything valuable to say in the first place or whether you're really the expert on this. Imposter syndrome is simply a way of keeping you safe, of not taking risks so you don't enter dangerous situations. So thank your mind and your body for doing its job. It's doing what it's designed to do, but don't let it control your actions. Now, all of these fears are even more common and felt more acutely by those who I call sensitive strivers, people who are both high achieving, meaning you're driven, you put a lot of pressure on yourself to succeed, but also highly sensitive, meaning that you think and feel everything more deeply. You have a biological disposition to process your own thoughts and feelings more deeply, as well as the behavior of those around you. So, for 10 years, I have researched, I have coached thousands of sensitive strivers, and I can tell you firsthand that this combination of qualities is what makes you who you are, and it likely has made you very successful. But on the other hand, situations that others find relatively easy, like making decisions, recovering from setbacks, trusting your judgment, can send you into a downward spiral. So, I want you to tell me if any of these sound familiar. And again, you can go ahead and type the numbers in the chat. So I experience emotions to a high level of depth and complexity. I consider myself to be driven and enjoy pushing myself to achieve goals. I'm kind, compassionate, and empathetic to others. I have an inner critic that never takes a day off. I often put other people's needs ahead of my own. I judge myself harshly and tend to take criticism personally. So, this is a quick assessment in my book. I provide a much more thorough one. But if you identified with most of these statements, then you are a sensitive striver. And in my work with sensitive strivers, assertiveness stands out as the number one skill that demonstrates confidence to the outside world and helps you cultivate a life that supports your own ambitions and your inner self. So, whether you are advocating for your ideas in a meeting, you're asking for a new opportunity, you're having to manage up, you're having to set limits with family and friends, you have to know how to get your ideas heard and to stand your ground with tact and professionalism. And most of all, it's important that you communicate in a way that leverages your innate warmth and empathy. So, there's many benefits to speaking up. Internally speaking, when you speak your mind, helps reduce your stress, helps you avoid burnout. You also build confidence and self esteem by signaling to your subconscious that your thoughts are of value. And shifting your inner confidence translates to external results, more visibility, influence, better pay, new opportunities. You boost the perception that you're an effective leader and get recognition that you deserve, all which helps you feel more satisfied, productive, fulfilled. But perhaps most of all, the most important benefit is that you set an example for others. Because when you speak up, you teach someone how to value and respect you. You teach them how to value all voices. So if you're not going to do this for yourself, then do it for the women who come after you. All right. So now I want to hear from you again. Type in the chat. If you spoke up, if you used your voice more, what else would be possible for you? What opportunities would it unlock for you internally, externally, personally, professionally? What would be different? Hannah said more opportunities to be seen as leader and be treated as such. 100%. So, unlocking new possibilities for yourself comes down to giving yourself permission, to changing the inner dialogue of what you deserve and what you're worthy of, to giving yourself reassurance instead of trying to constantly seek it from others. And the key is being okay with taking imperfect action and trusting your ability to get better as you go. So I want you to tell me which of these mindset shifts resonates with you the most today, and which will you carry with you for the rest of our time? So, who am I to do this? Who am I not to do this? I have no idea what I'm doing. Becomes I'll go for it and I'll see what happens. I have to wait for the perfect timing. Becomes I know I'll never be 100% ready and I have to act anyway. I have to make sure it's okay before proceeding. I'll move ahead with my plan unless otherwise specified. One of my favorite phrases. I can't let people see me sweat because I won't know everything, so it's wise to ask for help when I need it. Excellent. So now I want to dive into 9 strategies to speak up more powerfully and assertively. Speaking up more powerfully and assertively is made up of a 3-part framework, which I share in my book. I call it the Communication Trifecta. We're going to dig into it next. So I'm going to give you 3 strategies for each area, covering both written and spoken communication, and action steps within each. So all of this means that by the end of our time today, I want to leave you with a toolbox that you can put into practice. So let's start with the first part of that communication trifecta, which is what you do. And this refers to the actions that you take. So, the first strategy of what you do is being proactive and taking more initiative. So, when I ask clients why they have trouble speaking up in meetings, on calls, they typically say it's because they don't feel comfortable or familiar with the people who are present. And that makes them hold back. So sensitive strivers in particular need connection to feel safe and at ease. And that's why I tell them that preparing for these types of situations happens long before you dial in or log on to Zoom. You need to make an effort to get to know your colleagues, your counterparts, your clients, the people you are trying to influence before this. So, getting over the hump of sharing your thoughts becomes so much easier when you are comfortable and have context on the other people in the room. So, this gives you important understanding of what's most important to them, what's relevant to them, so that you can craft your message in that direction. So, make sure you are reaching out and having coffee chats with different stakeholders, collaborators, leaders. This serves a few purposes. So, the first is that it warms you up to communicating with people one on one. So, you can translate that comfort and that ease into a larger group setting. And second, it gives you an opportunity to unearth what their definition of success is, what their possible concerns are. So your goal is to always understand what your stakeholders' major pain points are so that you can solve, appeal, or try to get ahead of them. So what challenges are top of mind that they are trying to solve, and how does your work plug into that? And keep in mind the what's in it for me factor. Making your message personally relevant to your audience should always be at the forefront if you want to make an impact. So, let's say you need another team to adopt a new procedure, but they're being resistant. So, instead of saying, we need you to change this report by June 30th, you would adapt that to focus on how the change benefits them. So, will it streamline their workflow? Will it save them time and headaches? Will it improve client satisfaction, for instance? So, this shift is very important because it gets us out of our own heads and thinking so much about what will people think about me? How will they judge me? And instead, focusing on taking a more empathetic approach to our communication that has the audience at the center. All right, strategy two of what you do is focus on the essentials, or in other words, be concise. Being succinct is paramount today when the average attention span is less than 8 seconds. 8 seconds. Yet I see women all the time trying to compensate for their insecurities by over explaining, adding more information, either because we get nervous or because we want to say more or prove we're knowledgeable by dumping more information on people. But doing so only ends up clouding your core message. You confuse people, you lose people, because the more words that you use, the more you soften your message. Or on the flip side, the fewer words that you use, the more you strengthen your message. So, if you have a lot of information to share, consider preparing a pre read. So, this is a document that provides important background information or context on a subject. That may be in depth details about timeline, your product, analytics, reports. So, not only does this make you look very prepared and proactive, it means you can be more more concise in the time you do have and speak so that your words land more powerfully. So, similarly, removing undermining language from your vocabulary. Women tend to bloat our speech with qualifiers like, this may not be important, but, or I know this sounds silly, I may be wrong. Probably the most biggest offender of this is just. I just wanted to check in. I just think there's a different way we could approach this. How many of you are guilty of overusing just? I am definitely raising my hand here. So, the simplest way to begin strengthening your communication is through your emails. You have the most control over that. You can be deliberate. So, start by just removing the word just. For example, I just wanted to check in becomes I'm checking in on this. Or better yet, I'd like an update by the end of the week. Another simple switch to stop diminishing yourself is to switch I'm sorry for thank you. I'm sorry for the delay becomes thank you for waiting. I'm sorry about the typo becomes thank you, nice catch. I'll make that change now. And then speaking of emails, you must make yours digestible. So your colleagues, leaders, the people you are trying to influence, they're receiving dozens, if not hundreds, of emails a day. And All too often, I see clients making the mistake of sending a wall of text. So, generally speaking, your email should be no more than 5 lines in length. I know that sounds short, but otherwise, it should be a phone call, a meeting, an attachment, for example. So, use bullets, use numbering to draw attention to the most important bits of information. All right, let's finish up what you do by talking about setting boundaries. Boundaries don't come naturally to sensitive strivers because we tend to be kind hearted people pleasers. We like to keep our clients, our teams happy. So we say yes and we take on too much. But saying no is a very essential leadership skill. Creating healthy limits is what frees you up to interact with people in productive ways, to respond effectively on demands for your time, and to focus on doing work you enjoy. So you have to say no to certain situations, people, assignments, so you can say yes to the ones that do serve you. So, how do you do that? How do you set boundaries gracefully? So, first, try putting space between the request and your acceptance. So, get used to having the words come out of your mouth of, I have to think about this. Let me check my calendar first. Let's talk about how we might make this work before you commit. Next, you can offer an alternative. So if a deadline is unreasonable, for example, you can say, I'm happy to take this on. Realistically, here's what I can do in that time frame provided. Or here are the resources I'll need to make this happen. A core tenet of assertiveness is finding those win-wins. So looking for a workable compromise wherever possible, helping the other person achieve their goal of getting the deliverable done, but also not being a complete pushover and asserting your timeline. And finally, set limits with people who want to pick your brain. I'm sure we have all been there. You have valuable knowledge to offer. You deserve to be compensated for that. So explain how someone can hire you. You might say, my schedule is packed and lunch or coffee isn't possible, but I could see us working together on this. I'd love to work together and figure out how to help you solve this problem. Let's discuss a package that works, or let's hop on a call and see what might make sense. All right. The next pillar of the communication trifecta is what you say, or the actual content of your message. Someone needs to hear a message on average 7 times before they remember it or they take action on it. There's also a primacy and a recency effect at play, whereby we remember the first thing that is shared and the last thing that is shared. So these psychological principles are really important to keep in mind so that you can think more consciously about how you structure and share your information. So, if you were forced to boil down your main idea to one sentence, what would it be? Use that as your subject line or repeat that phrase verbatim when you speak. That will ensure that you are always drawing the audience back to your biggest takeaways that you want them to remember. You're reinforcing that point and continue to reinforce it throughout your presentation. You can also do this with something called flagging statements. So flagging is like sticking a flag in the ground or waving one in the air that says, pay attention, what I'm going to say is important. So examples of flagging statements might be, it all boils down to X. The heart of the matter is Y. I can't underscore enough Z. One of my clients' favorite tactics, and one of mine too, especially when you have to speak strongly and coherently off the cuff, is using the PREP framework. So PREP refers to making a point succinctly, backing it up with a reason, providing evidence, and then reiterating your point. So it's a bit of a sandwich. So if we take this in action, your point might be, I believe we should take direction A. Your reason is, we've received positive feedback about this approach. Evidence, for instance, our president said he supports it. P, point, again, that's the reason why I believe direction A is best. Knowing what you'll say is always exponentially easier when you have time to prepare. But many times that's not possible. So what do you do in those cases? Thinking on your feet is key to projecting presence, but also to making you feel more comfortable, secure, and confident in the moment so that you don't go down negative thought spirals about your performance or how you look like a fool. So, a moment ago, we talked about flagging statements, which is putting a stake in the ground to highlight a key point. But when you're caught off guard, you can use bridging statements. So, bridging helps you make a transition from one idea to another. So, just like a bridge. And it's especially useful when you want to change the subject. It's not something you're comfortable about or want to comment on, or to steer the conversation away from something you don't know much about back to territory that you do. So, a few examples of bridging statements may be I cannot speak to X, but what I can say is Y. While X is important, it's also important to remember that Y. Or my favorite, I use this one all the time. Let me back up and first give context on X. You can also buy yourself time and dig deeper by asking open ended questions. So, when you do this, you will often find an in, someone will give you some information that you can grasp onto and piggyback off of. So, some of my favorite questions are what's an example? What's your impression of this situation? How does this fit into your plans? What's your desired outcome here? And last is that you don't have to answer right away. You don't have to answer in that moment. You can always tell the person that you need to loop back to them, but explain why doing so is in their best interest. So, for instance, that's a great question, Jamie. What I would like to do is take that back and do some research. That way, I can come back to you and give you the most informed answer possible. So, you're showing how it's in their benefit. Remember that what's in it for me factor earlier. All right. As we talked about earlier, women are interrupted more than men. So I want to give you some strategies for pushing back, especially in the virtual environment where it can be harder to do because our conversation is more structured and there's a lack of verbal cues and body language. So first is to circle back. So when you do speak up, if no one comments on what you say, don't let it drop. Let the next person speak and then interject and say, I didn't get any feedback on that idea I shared. I just wanted to know, is it on target or not? When you let your idea drop, someone else may pick it up, may say the same thing and get credit for it. I'm sure we've all been there. Second is using the broken record technique. We saw this beautifully illustrated by Vice President Kamala Harris in the debates. And this is appropriate when you have to be more forceful. So, just like a broken record, you repeat the same statement. And I suggest using the person's name. So, you might say, John, 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 or as Kamala Harris did, I'm speaking. I'm speaking. My clients have also had a lot of success with something I call the pass the baton strategy. So, how it works is that you review the agenda in advance, you find a place where you want to contribute. Perhaps it's a certain project or initiative. Then you contact the meeting organizer in advance, let them know that that's where you would like to speak, so that when the time comes, they can hand the baton, like in track and field, if you remember that, they can hand the baton over to you at the appropriate time. This is really useful because it makes it so much easier to interject and it makes you look more credible and influential because you have the organizer calling on you. All right. So, the last part of our communication trifecta is how you say it, which pertains to your presentation, your body language, your delivery. You have probably heard of the phenomenon of uptalk, which is going up at the end of a sentence like it was a question. So I do want to be clear here that the suggestion to avoid uptalk is in no way meant to tone police how we as women deliver our communication, but rather to make sure you are taken seriously. Because, for better or worse, uptalk has been linked in studies to being perceived as having lower status or being less knowledgeable. And researchers think that's because the tone introduces doubt into people's minds because of the upward inflection at the end. It has a similar upward inflection as if you were asking a question. and can signify that you are unsure of the value that you're sharing. So the best way to counteract uptalk is by practicing using a steady or a downward inflection when you speak. So uptalk tends to happen frequently when we introduce ourselves, which as entrepreneurs, small business owners, leaders, we are doing pretty often, right? So I will give you an example of my introduction with uptalk compared to one that has a downward inflection. So with uptalk, my name is Melody Wilding, and I'm a licensed social worker and executive coach. Now compare that to my name is Melody Wilding, and I'm a licensed social worker and executive coach. So you can almost see in your head how the words have a downward slope at the end. So as you work on changing this habit, recruit a colleague or your manager, a mentor who can help you. Have them give you specific feedback on your meetings and highlight one specific improvement that you can make. And if possible, wherever possible, try to take your calls standing up. This allows you to get more air in your lungs. It allows your posture to be more correct. And it makes your voice fuller and more resonant because you're breathing properly. It can also help a lot with focus because you're channeling your jitters into movement and can help you think more clearly than if you were just sitting down and sedentary. Okay, coming across confidently on camera like this is key now to elevating your visibility, your credibility in this new environment. So it starts by taking up space, literally and figuratively. If you sit too far away from the camera, it makes you look small, right? So if you sit like this, it's a very different feel than being close up to the camera. And it can subconsciously signal to people that you're less powerful, you're nervous, you're otherwise disengaged. So you can fix this by positioning your camera so that it shows the area from your chest to your head, right? And make sure that your head isn't chopped off, that there's some visual space between the top of your head and the frame. And keep your camera eye level. So propping, I have a camera stand that props my camera a little bit up, but you can prop your laptop on a stack of books, for example. Because likewise, if you're using the camera on your computer and you're looking down at your computer, it also is not a great look. It can make people look like you're talking down to them. Lighting matters as well. Shadows are not a good look, nor do they add to your credibility. So avoid sitting with your back to a bright window or being backlit by a lamp. And whenever you can, try to take video calls with a window in front of you. That natural light makes a world of difference for how you show up. And practice looking straight into the camera rather than glancing at your image on a screen. So right now I'm looking straight at the camera lens versus now I'm looking at my picture on the Zoom screen. So this is the closest we get to eye contact right now. But it's a difficult behavior to train yourself into since it's not natural. You want to look at people's faces. So what I suggest doing is getting a sticky note, drawing a smiley face on it, and practicing looking at that instead. Also very helpful, especially you who tend to be more sensitive and introverted, managing the level of stimulation is very important. So on Zoom in particular, turning off your self-view option on Zoom makes a world of difference. We as humans are not meant to be constantly self-monitoring in the way we are now. And there's a lot of research that is pointing to the psychological effects of that. And second is using active speaker mode, which just shows the person who is speaking at one time and not all the Brady Bunch circles. So it can really help with keeping you focused and heading off nerves. All right. So sometimes the most powerful way to communicate is by saying nothing at all. Sometimes powerful communication is about strategically using silence as a way to control the dynamic of a conversation. Silence is so underused because it doesn't come naturally to most of us. We're very uncomfortable with it at first. If you think about it, how much of your time do you spend in silence? Most of us, it's close to none. How often have you ever sat in a meeting where there is just quiet? And if there was quiet, how comfortable did you feel with that silence? It rarely happens. We tend to spend most of our lives filling in gaps, finishing other people's sentences. So the rarity of silence is what makes it so powerful. So this week, I want you to try pausing just 3 seconds before responding to the person you're talking with. It might not seem like a long time, but it's really difficult. And you'll notice how, in many cases, it encourages the other person to keep talking. It actually helps the conversation go deeper. Silence is also a very good way to take back control of the dynamic when you're dealing with someone who may be more aggressive. So, if someone is lashing out at you in a meeting, for instance, take a deep breath, count down from 3 before you respond. That can almost instantaneously stonewall the aggression in many ways. So, if we have any parents here, this is the same psychology as to why you don't respond to a child's temper tantrum, because it extinguishes that response. And similarly, don't let silence scare you as a response from your audience. It's completely normal to have gaps in conversation, just feels a little weird in the virtual environment. Do not make it mean that you automatically bombed the presentation. In fact, it might mean that you left such an impact on people that they are processing what you're saying. So be brave enough to call the dynamic out, to acknowledge it, to say something like, well, it seems all of you are digesting what I shared, so I will give you a moment. Or if you are the one speaking, anticipate what questions people might have in advance. I always like to have my clients prepare a few frequently asked questions that they just have in their back pocket in the event that they get to the end of their presentation and there are no questions, there's just silence. You can say, well, what you might be asking yourself now is, how much is this going to cost? Answer that question. How long is it going to take? Answer that question. So this heads off some of the awkwardness and also shows that you're in people's heads, right? It's almost like you are reading their mind, and it shows you're in charge of the conversation. All right. So there you have it. That is our communication trifecta. So we have covered each part: what you do, the actions you take, what you say, the content of your message, and how you say it, which is your delivery or your body language. Now, within each framework, you have a few action steps to add to your toolbox. So in terms of what you do, be proactive about building relationships one-on-one so you can translate that to larger groups. Focus on the essentials by being concise and succinct, and focus on setting boundaries gracefully. For what you say, use repetition to reinforce your key points. Stay cool if you're caught off guard by bridging back to what you know, asking questions, or deferring, and respond to interruptions gracefully. And then finally, we covered how you say it. Avoiding uptalk, use the downward inflection, project presence on camera, and embrace the power of silence. So go ahead and type in the chat. What is your biggest takeaway? I want to hear it. Great. And while you were sharing that, if you enjoyed today's talk, then I want to encourage you to check out my new book, Trust Yourself. This is a guide for achieving greater success as a sensitive striver without so much stress. So it is really designed as a concrete roadmap to help you break free from self-doubt and find the confidence to lead effectively. So I will put the link in the chat. And yes, Robin, I can go back. So Hannah, I think we're ready for some questions.
Awesome. This was amazing, by the way. I thank you for making it so actionable in such bite-sized ways. That's super helpful. Let's see. I don't believe any questions were dropped during the presentation. So if anyone has any questions now, feel free to either unmute yourself or drop them right in the chat.
Yeah, well,
Also,
people are,
I don't have my camera, like I can't see myself right now because based on your feedback, and I actually really love it. Like it's
yeah,
kind of liberating.
it's very weird at first. And there's a time and a place to be able to see yourself, right? If you're going to be analyzing that presentation or looking at, like, when I present, oftentimes I keep my camera on, so I make sure my feed is live and that there's no technical error. So there's a time and place for this, but most of the time, if you can keep it off, it really saves your energy, and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, totally.
Um,
I had a quick
yeah,
question about looking into the camera. So
yeah.
I know that is, and you're so good at it. Like I feel like I'm connecting right with you. Do you ever struggle with yourself as a speaker connecting with the audience if you're not looking at them and instead, looking at the smiley face sticky note?
Yes, it's hard. It's really difficult in this environment to train yourself into that behavior. And so often what happens is I'll be good with this the whole presentation, and then as soon as the Q&A starts, I end up looking at people.
Yeah,
And
okay.
by that point, you've established more of a connection,
Got it.
right? But it can be really hard, especially if you're interviewing or you're talking with a client for the first time.
Mhm.
Um, what I would suggest is practicing with someone you feel comfortable with, to train yourself into this behavior. It's hard, but once you get going, you start to get used to it.
Got it. Yeah,
And just
so
make sure.
interesting.
Yeah, great. And I'm seeing a few people liked the tips for when you're caught off guard, how to be ready to alleviate stress. Yeah.
Hmm. Hannah asked, do you have any other
Mhm.
tips for speaking up when you feel it's likely to upset the other person, raising rates, pushing back on timelines, etc.?
Yes. So, Hannah, what I would say, a few ideas. First is, wherever you can, establish shared goals. So, making sure that you are making clear to the person that we're on the same team, or even showing the person that you are committed. Now, I'm committed to making sure that we can get our projects done on time. In order to do that, I'll need an extra 3 days for this project. So making sure that you're leading with that intention, and then providing the request. Or raising rates. I'm committed to providing you with the best possible service. In order to ensure I'm able to do that, our rates will be increasing $100 in June, right? Or especially with negotiation, for example, if you want to take a more collaborative approach, of course, there's so much here where you need to be assessing the power dynamics of who's involved and be tactful and cognizant of that. But you can also take the approach of asking a question. So with raising your rates, how can we get to a number that works for both of us, right? Where I would like to be is X. How can we get to a number here that works for both of us? Or how can we compromise? How can we find a timeline that fits both of our needs here? So I hope that helps. Some thoughts. Good. I'm glad it does, Hannah. So Rebecca was saying the tip about having questions at the ready for filling silence gaps when nobody has questions after presentations is useful. Yes. And most of this is about managing your own stress, right? Because what tends to happen is that we get to the end of the presentation, we're like, okay, questions? Okay, I guess not. All right, bye everyone. And we don't end on a strong note. So all of this is that I'm trying to give you is to help you feel confident about your delivery, because that energy comes through. You might not think it does, but people sense that. So, yeah. Excellent. So good. Another this may be a little strange. I didn't touch on it too much. But something that I have been finding helpful lately is also making sure that physically I'm ready to speak up. And what I mean by that is that before I go into a challenging situation, I have lowered my own level of stimulation. So making sure that if I have an important client meeting, for example, raising my rates, an important conversation like that, I am not rushing into it. I am not doing it from a back to back to back to back call. So I have time to gather my thoughts. I have time, especially as a sensitive person. If you are overstimulated, you're going to get into that conversation, and the tiniest little thing is going to send your stress flying, and you're going to freeze under pressure or going to go into a fight or flight response. So really being intentional about managing your own physiology before these types of more stressful conversations. Or even for me, my anxiety tends to manifest physically for me in tightness in my muscles. And so I actually have been doing a lot more, I guess you could call it stretching, but trying to loosen my jaw, and even under, you can take your knuckle and put it kind of under your chin like this, and it helps loosen your tongue, and it helps you speak more comfortably and freely. And so all of these things make a big difference, actually.
I have a mug that says relax your jaw, and it's just, I love
That's
it
great.
so much. Mm-hmm.
That's excellent. I love that. Great. Any other questions?
This was absolutely amazing. I feel like I just gained so much in not even an hour. Thank you for keeping it so concise and actionable. This was absolutely incredible. Thank you for taking the time to share your expertise with us and just investing into the Dreamers and Doers Collective. And thank you, everyone, for joining today and showing up so authentically and vulnerably and participating and asking such great questions. We couldn't do this without you. And finally, one last plug for Circle, because we don't want anyone to miss out. So this is the final call to sign up for Circle. Don't worry, we'll definitely be emailing you more if you haven't signed up yet. So might as well just sign up now. All right, everyone, I hope you have an amazing day. Thank you for joining. It was so amazing seeing everyone's faces and just getting to hang out and learn together today.
Thank you, everyone, so much for your time.
Bye.
Bye.